Welcome to the final session of Infinity Unbound, Get to Secure. I'm Tristan Shortland, Chief Innovation Officer with Infinity Group. I'm joined by Tom.
Yeah, I'm Tom. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at Infinity Group.
So far we've looked at the evolving threat landscape for SMBs. We've looked at why SMBs are such a target for cybersecurity attacks, and how to understand current levels of maturity and where you're at now. We've looked at compliance and the cost of doing business. We've looked at data, so how we can protect that data, whether that's in ERP or CRM systems or other line of business systems. We've looked at how AI has affected the technology landscape and particularly from a security standpoint, what that means, and some of the risks maybe of a decentralized AI strategy and letting users kind of find their own way there. So this session is really to talk about how we can get you to a safe position. So how do you assess where you're at now and what your current environment looks like? How do you kind of define priorities and come up with an end goal and a plan of action? So we'll look at what's available in the market today with Microsoft, and how you can make the most of tools that you're probably already paying for, actually. So I guess to start off, Tom, how do you think customers should be assessing their current security posture and where they're at now?
Yeah, I mean, I think part of that is understanding and accepting the level of maturity that you have now. You know, what policies, procedures have you developed to help you control what goes on within your business? Do you have like joiners and leavers processes? Do you have a fixed approach to how you set up new devices? Do you have a policy that controls bring your own device or people using mobile devices? And understanding that and then balancing that and baselining that against a defined standard like Cyber Essentials or ISO 27001 and getting your gap tells you A, where you are, and B, how big the journey is that's out in front of you. You can use tools that are already available to you in the Microsoft stack, things like Secure Score, that give you an indication of how well configured your Microsoft 365 environment is against baselines that Microsoft define, but are born out of other frameworks like the CIS framework and so on that help you understand the changes that you need to make in your environment to make it better. And you need to test your users and test their awareness. Users will always be your first layer of defense in any cybersecurity strategy. So how aware they are of the policies that you have. Having policies is great, but if no one knows they exist, what use are they? And if people don't follow them, what use are they? So you have to make sure people know what they are, where they are, what they're for, why they exist, and the fact that they serve a well-defined purpose. And you can do that using tools, you can do that using regular training, you can do it using events, but that they all form part of an essential process for understanding where you are.
Yeah, good. Potentially then there's lots to do depending on where you're at and where you want to get to. How do you think you go about kind of prioritization of the kind of activities in that roadmap? Because clearly there's some kind of quick wins that deliver a lot of value, but there's also some bigger stuff to do. Yeah,
I mean, you can start with risk assessments. Look at the risk. What's the biggest risk that you're facing? And in a lot of cases, some of the biggest risks are some of the easiest things to fix as well. So that risk assessment gives you your list of challenges. You prioritize those based upon how you perceive them within your business, because not all business, the risks are not always going to be the same. And pick off the things that you consider most important to you first of all. Follow that with the things that are the quick wins and the low-hanging fruit, and things that are value adds, nice to haves. They can come last. And sometimes you might find that there is something which is prohibitively expensive, and you balance that against the risk that you've defined, but without understanding what the risks are, you don't really know what you're fighting.
Yeah, and I think you've got to find that balance as well, haven't you, of usability. So when you think about things like the Secure Score, get it too high, it then becomes a barrier to doing business sometimes.
100% is never the target because you can't get there, but a baseline of if we take secure score specifically, we consider that a score of over 70% is a good target to start for. You can expand on that once you've got there, but if you get to that 70% kind of benchmark, then you know that you're in a reasonably good place. It's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect, but you're in a far better place than you would have been. Typically when we look at organizations, when we assess them or they come on board with us, we're often seeing scores of 30% or less. Yeah. And that huge jump up to 70% makes a massive difference. And it's not necessarily something that's really intrusive to users. It's all stuff that they're going to be used to. But your IT environment does become more procedurally cumbersome, but it has to.
Yeah. And I guess goes back as well to what's the big picture, when we're talking to organizations, is it about aligning with a particular framework? Is it about doing business in particular geographies? Those things are going to affect what the plan looks like potentially, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. If it's that your target is that you want to do business with public sector or government enterprises, then there's a specific route that you might want to take to a specific standard for that. If you're just looking from a very general standpoint to say, well, look, we know that the landscape is changing, that it's very dangerous, then we need to address those challenges, then that might align you in a slightly different direction. But it all depends on where the business is going. So it's always tailored, unique to a business's needs.
Yeah, good. Then we'll talk about tools for a bit. So for me, there's kind of two sides to that. So the first is tooling to kind of assess the current state and what the landscape looks like and what that roadmap needs to look like. And then the second is technically what tools have we got to facilitate what we're trying to do. So thinking about that kind of assessment piece first, what's our approach to doing that and getting it right?
Yeah, our normal approach is that gap analysis piece. So we spend time with the business, with various leaders within the business, and specific functions like human resources and so on to understand how they operate, what policies, procedures, and processes they're following, and that's kind of the first part of an assessment that then follows with a technological overview of the technologies that are in use, whether that's on-premises technology, cloud technology, and not necessarily the Microsoft cloud, it could be other clouds, and assess their current security posture based upon the core requirements of the Cyber Essentials framework as a starting point. Because as we've discussed in other videos in the series, for businesses that aren't mature, that don't have any compliance now, Cyber Essentials is that first step towards a kind of more secure future.
Yeah, and that could be the interesting bit, right? When you start finding out about all these shadow IT systems that are out there and what users have actually got.
Yeah, and you don't understand the scale of the problem until you've started to pick through the weeds to see what's going on. Yeah.
And are you looking at kind of infrastructure and things as part of that as well?
Yeah. It encompasses switches, firewalls. They become slightly less relevant in the modern world where people are working from anywhere, but they are still relevant to office locations. You can't leave those routes open for people to get inside networks, so they have to form part of the overall strategy. And that's down to whether you're keeping firewalls up to date, whether they're even fit for purpose from a capacity standpoint. As organizations move further into the cloud, those firewalls need to be able to cope with more traffic. And if they're not big enough or feature rich enough for those kind of challenges, then they hold back productivity.
Yeah. And I think we talked again in other sessions around how organic growth sometimes means you end up with stuff that's not fit for purpose, right? Because you've outgrown it. But
and it sneaks in through the back door because infrastructure is invisible. You don't consider it. There's something that you plug into a box in the wall and it gives you internet. You just think, well, that's it. It's on or off, isn't it? But it's typically your domestic routers and things that you have at home. They might be good for 4 or 5 people. 10 to 15 devices, something like that. And then if you expand into a small business environment, you might have something that works for 30 people and maybe 50 devices. But then you start to encounter growth where you've got more people coming into the office, you've got more devices per head. because people are bringing tablets, they're bringing their personal laptops into work, they're bringing phones into work, and suddenly you start to lose bandwidth, you lose speed, you lose productivity, and you don't necessarily know why, because it's that invisible thing in the corner that supposedly just works.
Yeah, and I guess you put the voice traffic through.
Yeah, they're not all the same. And particularly changes after the pandemic with more people using video calls and video conferencing. There's a lot more required by those kind of tools than were required before. And they have to come into scope when you're considering security, because there are other avenues of attack there as well, with those different methods of communication being used.
Yes. Good. So we've got a kind of tried and tested assessment phase, I guess, gets us the lay of the land and a roadmap for where we want to get to in terms of tools that Infinity have got and Microsoft have got to actually implement some of this stuff. What kind of thing do we use?
Yeah, I mean, we try to centralize as much of the security as we can around the Microsoft stack, because what it delivers is very, very comprehensive. And for small businesses, there's the Microsoft 365 Business Premium license, which includes by default pretty much all of the security tools that an organization needs to bring itself up to a good standard. For those larger organizations, there's the Microsoft 365 Enterprise E3 as a kind of a jumping off point for those larger businesses, and those that, as they become more secure, jump up to the Microsoft 365 E5 license, which has got the very, very comprehensive stack of security tools within it. And Infinity Group have developed solutions that live within those licenses to kind of demystify the configuration that you have to apply, because just buying the license isn't enough. You just buy the license, high fives all round and go home, because none of those tools work out the box unless you actually configure them to do what you want them to do. So to help organizations on that journey, we have managed services that sit around those. We call one of them Secure Core, which gets the best out of that license. It maximizes the usage of all of the features, and with a target of pushing that secure score up beyond that 70% goal. And then to maintain it and hold it there, because with all things, the landscape changes, and if you just do it once, over time it loses its value.
I guess that's the whole principle of Secure Core, isn't it? Here's a baseline of what good looks like. You're either at it or above it, hopefully not below it. Thanks, Tom. It's really interesting. So thank you very much for joining us for Infinity Unbound Get to Secure. Hopefully you've managed to catch all the sessions. If not, they're all available on demand, so you can catch up.